I was doing a lesson with my fourth graders not too long ago, and the theme was Jesus is our friend. That was the theme in the lesson. And I began by saying, you know what, my friends, today we're going to talk about the most important friend you will ever have in your whole life. There'll be no more loyal, no more faithful, no more loving friend than the friend we're going to talk about today. And his name is Jesus. Now, I'm obviously beginning with movement 3 as a focusing activity. But first we're going to talk about friendship. Let's talk about friends. What does it mean to be a friend? Anybody here have a good friend? Movement 1. Get down and have them to get them to draw their friends and get them to draw themselves with their friends and to talk about their drawing and to share them together and to show them off. And then we're going to, now why do we need friends? Movement 2. What would life be like if we didn't have friends? How do you know somebody's a good friend? How would somebody know that you're a good friend? And so you ask them, what would life be like with, did you ever think of Jesus as a friend? Imagination. And you get all kinds of answers. I remember a kid saying, no, it doesn't go to my school, you know, which is true. You know, at recess. Where is he at recess? I want to play with him. No, but but I often use imagination as a transition back into movement 3. And then the story, of course, I use the biblical story of Jesus saying, let the little children come to me, and telling the big people that, hey, they better become like kids if they want to get into the reign of God. And what it means to be a friend of Jesus, what it means to live like a friend of Jesus. But then you have to go back to, now, okay, I think Jesus is our friend. I think we need Jesus as a friend. But what do you think yourself? How does that make you feel? What does that tell you about yourself? What does it tell you about Jesus? And then what would it mean if we were to try to live like friends of Jesus this coming week? What would be some of the things we might think of doing or not doing or avoiding if we want to be friends of Jesus? Because Jesus definitely wants to be friends of us. But you can see how the thing, the point I'm making, I don't mean, I'll give a high school example in a moment. Don't be hell-bound by the movements at all. They're a flow. In fact, I use the word movement very deliberately because it is that of, like almost of a symphony where the theme occurs and reoccurs and comes back again and echoes and so on. So it can be mixed up in all kinds of ways. And in a sense, movement 5 is present from the beginning because you really wanted to come out with some kind of decision about it all. Let me take a high school example. One of the lessons that we just got through writing, and again, this is just an outline. It was on Jesus. Who is Jesus for you? This is where you can engage him with a life theme, like the example I gave earlier, like on the Trinity. You could begin by talking about relationships and the kind of relationships they have, that they want, that they dream of, that they'd love to have, etc., before talking about a relational God who calls us to right and loving relationship, and then moving back to saying, now, you know, what can you take from that might be helpful? What can we learn from this old symbol of the Trinity? What might it mean for our lives? Because we've always thought that it means very little. Other than a mystery we cannot explain. In fact, it's a mystery that explains everything. But what does it explain to you about yourself? What are you learning about yourself, about how to be in the world from this old symbol of our faith? And then how will you respond to it? So, but that's a life, that's beginning with a life theme. You could also begin with an explicit faith theme, as long as they're bringing their life to it. Like before we began the brief meditation last night, on the road to Emmaus, I asked you to bring yourself, to put yourself into the scene. But as long as they're bringing their own life into it, then the faith perspective, in other words, the religious language could begin at the very beginning. The lesson we've just done on Jesus, I simply situate them on the road to Caesarea Philippi. And you lay it out, you know, with a bit of engagement. You know, one fine day, they're all trudging along in the sweat of a Palestinian sun, and they're on the road to this village called Caesarea Philippi, Roman village probably. Tell them a little bit about that. But then Jesus stops them all in their tracks and says, hey, what are the latest rumors? What are they saying about me? And you tell them what the rumors are and for the funny things that are circling. But then he says, yes, but you, who do you say that I am? So then you say, now, supposing you're on the road with Jesus and he said that straight to you, looking you in the eye, who do you say that I am? How would you respond? Now, what are you inviting? In a sense, you're inviting their own praxis of Jesus. You're not asking their theory of Jesus. You're saying, but if you were right there on that road with those disciples and he looked you in the eye and said, okay, for you, who am I? So you'll very seldom get back the decree of Chalcedon or the Council of Chalcedon. they'll say, well, to me, Jesus means whatever. But that's what you're trying to get out of their table, their praxis of Jesus, what Jesus means in their everyday life. And then where they got that Jesus, and are they happy with him, and is he happy with them, and who formed this image, and so all of the critical reflection on their Christology, it can be encouraged and probed and analyzed, but then you give them access to perhaps a more life-giving Christology. And this is as rigorous and as academic and as scholarly as you can muster. There's nothing watered down about this type of approach. This should be the finest of good Christology. But not just Christology about Jesus, but what Jesus means for us. That if this is who Jesus was, cur deus homo, why did God become a person? And so on. Well, for powerful reasons. And for us, and what does it mean that God so loved the world as to give God's only Son for our salvation? And what does it mean to be saved? And how does he save us? And for what? And from what? And so you get into the whole story, because the vision is where the spirituality, the spiritual potential of it becomes particularly compelling, it seems to me. It comes from the story as well. But it's in the vision that you can touch into the hearts and souls of people, it seems to me. And then, of course, you have to come back and ask them, well, look, we've overviewed this whole theology of Jesus, but what's the best thing you learned from it? And how would you appropriate it and integrate it into your own life and make it your own? And would you ever want to follow this Jesus? And why? And what if? And what difference would that make? And, of course, again, movement 4 and 5 are constantly interlocking and bouncing off of each other and coming and being repeated. But it is that moment when they came to see for themselves, and then they decide to go back to Jerusalem. Some other points about the process. Let me just skip over this and come back to that overhead. I think this approach is favored by our church. And here again, I'm just quoting from the directory. Catechesis must present the Christian message in a meaningful way to refer clearly to the fundamental experiences of people's lives. And there's umpteen quotes that run through the General Catechetical Directory that invite this kind of integration. Catechesis to mediate a correct correlation, but I don't find the word correlation strong enough. I would use the word integration, and an interaction between profound human experiences and the revealed message. And then by correlating faith and life, catechesis bridges the gap between faith and life, encouraging lived faith. So it's and you can pile on the quotes in the General Directory. The generative theme may arise from life or may come from faith. The key is to generate interest and active participation. Expression can take any and every mode, and this is where people who are more artistic and creative can do wonderful work with having people bring themselves to expression. It's not just verbal. I kind of come by that from my traditions, but I've had people bring people to expression in all kinds of ways with creativity and art and movement, and the imagination is limitless with it. Critical reflection can be personal or social or both, reason, memory, and imagination. I've said enough about that. Should learn persuasive and ready access, facile, as De La Salle would say. It should be ready access to Christian faith, both story and vision. And I think that's where the persuasive, I think it has to, so that they know why at least good people and intelligent people believe this. And can see why, even if they don't. But that they know that it's not ridiculous or just old superstitions or something, but that it can be a wonderfully persuasive faith. So it's not as if I'm saying, well, I'll lay it out for you. It's up to you what to do with it. No, there has to be a certain rhetoric, a certain apologetic. It's crucial that the participants come to see for themselves, come to some kind of personal conviction if at all possible. Critical reflection be personal or social. Oh, no, sorry, I'm going back there. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. The decisions can be cognitive, affective, or behavioral. So in movement 5, you have to be very careful. I use this approach in teaching undergrads at Boston College for 25 years. And it was, I'm again not self-proclaiming. They were very popular courses. Nobody felt invasive or that they were put upon or anything, far from it. But you do have to be careful with you know, when you're because it's a very diverse place. Theology is required. So movement 5 was often, you know, so you know, you've done Aquinas' theology of nature and grace. You could ask them now, what do you clearly, what's your own thought about that? Do you see some real value in it? What is the value that you see in that whole interface of theology of nature and grace that Aquinas laid out so clearly? You know, can you trust it? Is it true? Supposing somebody took it seriously, what difference would it make in their lives? You don't say, what will you do? Now, when I teach 4th grade CCD in my parish, I ask them, how are you going to be a friend of Jesus? In other words, it is a real call to explicit conversion. It's more subtle in a theology and undergraduate theology course, obviously, because you have people there that's from other traditions and what have you. But yet you can bring them out to cognitive, affective, or behavioral traditions. And a group that I meet with, or have met with for many years, in a group, it's an adult education group in the parish, they often come to personal decisions, but they've often come to communal decisions, to do something together as well. There can be multiple combination, repeats of the movements. What else have I got up here? Some of this is, there's something here on the defining commitments of the approach is what matters most. I'll leave you to read about them. And then I have something also on questioning and how to craft the questions for each movement. Maybe I'll, rather than belaboring those, because I want to hear what you're thinking about it. So let's come back to this. What are you coming to see for yourself about such an approach? Why don't you take your pen and paper one more time, and we'll hear your responses. This life to faith to life, campus ministry or whatever.
Excuse me.
Please.
Can you tell us, has your system been critiqued by your peers, anyone in your peer group? I mean, I'm just curious, have they read this and said, Tom, this is good, but you should be thinking about this or that?
Yes and no. But most of the critiques have come from, well, one of the most strident critiques comes from fundamentalist Catholics or fundamentalist Protestants. Because if we have the Word of God in sacred Scripture, as the Protestants would say, then you'd simply tell people what it means. So you don't give young people a text and say, bring your life to that text and see what does it say to you. What do you hear from it? You tell them what it means. Now, my response is, why not do both? There have been fundamentalist Christians that have been, and there have been fundamentalist Catholics, who are especially afraid of movement 4. That you get them to talk about their life, you tell them a story and vision, and then you say to them, now, does that make any sense to you at all? What are you learning from that? What are you coming to see for yourself? No, you tell them what they should see. You tell them how to see it. And it's very dangerous to let them figure it out for themselves. The fact is that they'll figure it out for themselves anyhow. So all you're doing is making an explicit part of the pedagogy. And I also think of Jesus modeling that kind of freedom, that choice, and so on. So that there've been no mainstream devastating critiques. Now, there's all kinds of people have written about it and have commented on it, have subsumed it into styles of preaching, into styles of pastoral counseling, into styles of spiritual direction. But there's nobody who has coherently argued that this is not a sound approach. Now, that sounds pretentious for me to say, but there really isn't. There's people who would nuance it, who would start differently, who would be more creative too than I, especially around the arts and music and all the rest of it, which the approach very much allows for. So, but there are people who've written very positively about it as well. Now, but if you come across a good critique, I'd be more than happy to look at it. But no, it hasn't been. Why don't you go back to the neighbor? 5 minutes with the neighbor. We'll come back for 10 minutes, and we'll wind down to lunchtime. So, there's left thoughts, comments, insights, objections, additions, subtractions. Yourself. We haven't heard from you. Good and loud, leave you could.
In being answering a question
That you ask.
that the students ask.
Okay.
And that what I need to do, what I need to be more encouraging and inviting with is more of a Socratic method where I am more open to, rather than simply giving them an answer that I think they're looking for,
Yeah.
to asking them where that question's coming from. What do they see in their lives that are leading to this question? And to be more encouraging with the dialogue aspect.
Yes. Wonderful.
And to realize that sometimes they do already have many of the answers that they're searching for, but they don't know how to frame them, how to phrase them, how to, be able to turn to the outside and look back in to
Yes.
themselves and see that they're aware of it.
And so you're talking about drawing it out rather than pouring it in. Yeah. Why do you think you tend to give them the answers?
I guess part of it is that in our society at this point, and I'm not necessarily sure that it's ever been different, but at this point, we do look for ready-made answers.
Yeah.
And that a lot of times it is simpler to
Cut to
go
the
to
chase.
that
Sure,
ready-made answer.
sure. No, great response. And I think the whole image of the teacher as the answer person too. The teaching is telling, and answering questions and giving people answers. But again, I go back to that stranger on the road to Emmaus. I mean, if I was the risen Christ, I would have jumped out of the bushes and said, "Hey, look!" But instead, he joins their company and walks with them, and Jesus takes all bloody day on the road. You know what I mean? And it can take all bloody day because it's much easier to cut to the chase. But will they come to see for themselves? Yeah, lovely reflection. Thank you. Yeah. Other thoughts yourself?
Just to pick up on this too, I think that there is a great deal of pressure right now
Yeah.
on the part of the church hierarchy to give the answer.
Yes.
And that's, I think, not to open up a can of worms again, but that's the danger, I think, of the catechetical framework, because these are, at least tending to the answers, and there's a responsibility which high school teachers have, I think, we are being told, you must present the answers, and we'll hold you accountable for presenting the answers.
Yes. Yes. No, that is a tension. There's no doubt about it. But can you give them access to the great wisdom of the tradition and then ask good Socratic questions? And when you ask good Socratic questions, ask real good Socratic questions. Socrates was very poor at the Socratic method. Because if you go back and look at any of the Meno or any of the dialogues, they're really manipulative. Surely you think that any person of integrity would. And then there's a question. But the real question, what do you think yourself? How do you feel about that? Where did you get that idea? What difference would it make? That's not a yes or no response question either. But that really brings them to their own soul. You're getting into people's souls at that point, the deep heart core of them. But I often am amused when I read Plato and the Meno and those dialogues. I mean, he was as manipulative as hell with the whole thing, He wanted them to come. And they all got the right answer eventually. Because it was, but anyway, yeah. Yourself.
A broader concern.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing a lot of the things that we're saying, maybe we don't do this perfectly, but I think a lot of us are on this road.
I don't do it perfectly myself either. Yeah.
But what I see as the greater danger of the framework is that it has called us to be insular. This is a religious ed problem. This is a campus ministry problem. Well, we all know in our schools that some of the greatest pictures, compassionate faces of the church are the physics teacher.
Yeah.
And
the coach.
Teacher. And absolutely.
Yeah.
The coach. Well, what are we doing to share Christian praxis in the school as a whole instead of just in religious studies and campus ministry? How are we reaching out to the school to do this?
It's a great question. But if you invite me back next year, I'll give a whole workshop on that. But no, it's true. I mean, if we think that the religion aspect of the Catholic school is simply in the religion curriculum, the theology curriculum, we're missing the whole boat. And as you said, the people who have influenced us most, I played football Gaelic football for my high school and played it fairly well. And I remember a Dublin City final where I missed a free kick. We drew. We could have won it. And I missed it. And with about 5 seconds left in the game. And when we came in afterwards, the old coach, Joe Horn, who was a crazy old guy, lined us up. And he said, Tom, you stand over there. Okay, everybody else stand over here. And he drew a line. Now, probably a lot of people here have bitterness, hatred, animosity toward Tom right now. If anybody would like to get rid of that and let it go out of your heart and forgive him, give him a hug. It's up across the line. And nobody did for the longest time. And eventually one guy came over and kind of said, yeah, you know. But eventually every one of them crossed the line. When we get together 35, 40 years later, there's kids who still tell that story. And I mean, he taught more about forgiveness and reconciliation and peacemaking. Whew. But so so everybody in the school has to be on board with this kind of opportunity and commitment and possibility. Yeah, and I mean the science teacher. I think the science teachers can teach a sacramental consciousness probably more effectively than the theology teachers can. Because you get them to look whether through a telescope or a microscope or a stethoscope or whatever, but you get them to see the design, the beauty, the awe that's there in creation, in nature, without ever using God talk. No, maybe once in a while you might, but hey, you can be as scientific as you like. But there is a way. Then social studies, English literature. Yeah, no, everybody could. It's a great comment, really. Another thought, comment before we go. T, J, and then we'll give Ernest the last word.
I think one of the challenges that I've faced is timing. We only have so much time in a day, in a quarter, in a semester, to get through a rack of material. And perhaps one of the reasons why a lot of it is telling rather than drawing out is you need to get the content to them, okay? And that's a misunderstanding of what we're supposed to be doing. But the pressure is that there's so much complexity and a beautiful complexity to theology as there is to life that to try to really explore that, even the framework and even the catechism itself is not complex enough. It doesn't go as deep as we want to be.
No, it's quite super. Yeah.
And so, how to do that in the scope of the time we have? That's and this method, which when we open up discussion, it can go on and on and on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Although you do learn ways to facilitate a good discussion and yet not to spend the whole time discussing, like our time here. Hopefully you've been able to talk to neighbors and think about it and take notes from yourself, and yet I got to say lots of things as well. So you do learn to balance, that because if it's all discussion, they get fed up of it as well. They need good input and resourcing and so on. But some of the resourcing too can be done. We have all kinds of technologies now that handouts, overheads, emails. I email my notes to my graduate students all the time. Have them read them ahead of time before I even go in, blah, blah, blah. There are ways. And sending them to the resources and to the texts, whether they're texts of Scripture or texts of tradition, to find and research and do partnerships with the kid beside them and all kinds of things. So that I think we have to be imaginative, but you make a fine point. This approach is not nearly as expeditious as simply going in and lecturing them abundantly. But then, as John Dewey said, nobody ever really learned anything that made a difference to their lives by being abundantly lectured. Ernest.
I simply wanted to accent Jerry by commending in our folders, on the right side of the folder, the excerpt from the Mel Bulletin by the Argentinian brother is on educational pastoral care. It is an excellent text that speaks specifically to what Jerry is talking about, how everyone needs to be involved ultimately in the mission of evangelization and catechism.
Wonderful, thank you. We're just at break time for lunch. Thank you so much. I have to head home this afternoon. I'd love to stay and enjoy my